Greeting, folks. Kenyatta here. I'm delighted that you're here wanting to learn more about yourself as it pertains to stress and trauma. Greeting, folks. Kenyatta here. I'm that you're here to learn about yourself as it pertains to stress and trauma. I'll share a screen. The concept I'll share comes from the Community Resiliency Model, sometimes called CRIM, and it is created by Elaine Miller-Karas and developed by the Trauma Resource Institute, sometimes called TRI. It is copyrighted by TRI, so restriction applies to the reuse of this information. So let's get into it. Here I'll share about the resilient zone. The resilient zone will lay the foundation for us to explore stress, as well as tapping into stresslessness. We all have access to the language of our biology and a way to help us understand the human experience. What does this mean? Working with the capacity and inner wisdom of our body and nervous systems is in reach for everyone, regardless of race, ethnicity, religion, social class, as well as age and gender. What is the resilient zone? And what does it have to do with daily life? The resilient zone, or OK zone, is a state of well being in mind, body, and spirit. It is our window of tolerance. These green lines here shows the boundaries of the resilient zone. When you're in the resilient zone, one is able to experience a range of emotions, maintain the ability to think clearly, have access to executive functions of the brain, and or respond flexibly. And finally, one is still able to make sound decisions for oneself, family, and community. So within this window of tolerance, the resilient zone, red line depicts our inner experience or nervous system changing from moment to moment. Do you notice that there's a dynamic flow between highs and lows within the OK zone? There can be times in your day that you have more stress, and other times during the day when you're calmer. There's a natural, normal ebb and flow, and you can manage the challenges or stressors that you face during the day and being your best self in mind, body, and spirit. So, our goal here is to widen the zone so our nervous system can have greater movement within the resilient zone. So this is nice, and the reality is that many of us is not living with this dynamic flow in our nervous system. We will get to this in a moment. So let's check in. Are you still with me? Any questions? Please take a moment to enter your question in the comments or make a personal note so you can bring it to me when we work together. If this sounds very strange to you, you can also give it time or try it on. So before we move on, let's take a deep breath in. And as we breathe out, we can slowly let out a long sigh. May do it a couple more times. So as we move on, we can see here the resilient zone does not equal happy zone. So even though there's a nice dynamic flow, the OK zone does not mean happy all the time. Example, we may be sad, mad, or neutral and still be okay. Emotions move around within the resilient zone. When you're in your resilient zone or OK zone, you're your best self in good weather or bad weather. We may be doing all fine in our OK zone and a stressful event happens. A lightning bolt hits us. hits our nervous system and we're bumped out of this okay zone. We may go very high and then come crashing down, shown by these jagged lines. This is a normal reaction of the human nervous system. This movement in the nervous system is called a dysregulated nervous system, and it's hard on the mind and body. We may get stuck in the high zone or low zone. When we're stuck in the high zone, we may become irritable, anxious, panicky. And when we're stuck in the low zone, we may be depressed, self critical, or even suicidal. It's okay to get bumped out. We are not trying not to get bumped out. Instead, we want to know when we are so we can get back in. This is the human biological response to stress and not weakness. It is our biology, not weakness, or humanity, not weakness. This here is normal. 12 years of meditative practice, 9 years living in the monastery, and this is what my nervous system looked like for the first 6 months of COVID. I could not meditate away. In fact, I could not do sit in meditation anymore. This was intergenerational trauma surfacing. Working with my nervous system over time helped me to break the cycle and come back into balance. So getting stuck for too long can be a problem. So getting stuck for too long can become a problem, leading some to speak of disorders. So question for you, has anyone beside me ever been in the high or low zone? Can you relate to this? Does this sound familiar? Look familiar? Many light bulbs went off for me when I learned this concept. So let's check in again before we move to the final slide. So do you have any question? And if you do, you may take a moment to write them down. So before we move to the final slide, let's take a moment to orient to your space, noticing where you are. This communicates safety to your nervous system. Right now, in this moment, I am safe. Right now, in this moment, no one is harming me. You can see if you're drawn to anything that is pleasant or appealing to the eyes. And just take a breath there. We are not born equally. Some are born with a narrow zone and some with a wider zone. The top image is of a narrow resilient zone and the bottom is of a wider resilient zone. So remember, the goal is to widen the resilient zone. How? With simple wellness skills, like having a landing moment. My Zen master, Tai, sometimes shared about a teaspoon of salt in a glass of water and it being undrinkable versus the same teaspoon of salt in a pond where you wouldn't be able to taste it or notice it. The same is true for our nervous system. Narrow zone means that we are triggered easily and can easily be bumped out, while the wider zone gives more room for movement within the zone, pleasant or unpleasant movement, so not pleasant all the time. The good news is that we have the power to change our resilient zone, regardless of the depth. So here I've shared with you about the resilient zone. You may come back to watch this again as a reminder, or as well as to deepen your understanding of your resilient zone. as you begin to work with it. Please leave a question or comment below, and thank you for watching.